The Yventhri Empire had ruled the Outer Rim territories for 3 centuries, which in galactic terms was approximately 2.5 centuries longer than most species managed before something bigger and meaner came along to remind them that evolution was still very much in session. But the Yventhri hadn't been toppled yet, mostly because they were very good at 2 things: building ships that could crack planets like eggs, and hunting anything that moved, breathed, or had the audacity to exist in their general vicinity. Their whole civilization was structured around the hunt, not in the quaint philosophical way some species approached it. No poems about the noble stag or meditations on the circle of life. The Yventhri approach was more along the lines of find it, kill it, mount its head on your ship and make sure everyone knows you did it first. They'd turned predation into an art form, a religion, and a competitive sport all at once. Their military academies didn't have classes on tactics. They had advanced prey psychology and optimal kill zones, a practical workshop which made it all the more entertaining, at least from a cosmic perspective, that they just finished marking a human research station as their next target. The War Council chamber aboard the flagship Talon of Dominance was exactly what you'd expect from a species that took itself far too seriously. Holographic star maps floated in the air like angry constellations, each one marked with previous conquest sites. The walls were lined with trophies from 100 worlds, exoskeletons from the Chittering Expanse, crystallized neural clusters from the Thought Collective, and what appeared to be an entire fossilized wing from something that probably shouldn't have been killed, but definitely looked impressive when backlit. High Commander Dravos stood at the center of it all, his forearms crossed in what passed for contemplative among his species. His carapace bore the scars of 1,000 hunts, each one a story he'd probably tell you whether you asked or not. 2 of his 6 eyes focused on the holographic display, while the other 4 scanned his subordinates, watching for any sign of weakness or independent thought, whichever came first. The human outpost, he clicked, his mandibles scraping together in what might have been anticipation or just poor dental hygiene, presents an opportunity for the younger warriors to prove themselves. Translation: this was going to be so easy that even the trainees could handle it. Flight Commander Nexith, who had 17 successful hunts to her name and an ego to match, leaned forward with interest. Intelligence reports confirm minimal defensive capabilities, standard research configuration, approximately 40 humans, focused on botanical studies of the local gas giants' moons. Botanical studies, Dravos let the words hang in the air like a bad smell. They examine plants while sitting in a metal box in space. This is what passes for exploration among them. The council chamber rippled with what passed for laughter among the Yventhri, a sort of rhythmic clicking that sounded like 1,000 insects having simultaneous seizures. Humans had been on the galactic stage for barely 3 decades, and in that time, they'd managed to establish a reputation for being, well, aggressively mediocre. They didn't have the Yventhri's natural weapons, the Tolgathi's regeneration, or the Vremnath's ability to exist in 3 dimensions simultaneously. What they had was an alarming tendency to show up places, plant flags, and start naming things after old dead humans nobody had ever heard of. Their technology is adequate, but unremarkable, Nexith continued, pulling up schematics that had been helpfully provided by Yventhri intelligence networks. Standard deflector screens, capable of stopping micrometeorites and cosmic radiation but little else. Point defense systems for debris. One, and I cannot stress this enough, one outdated plasma cannon that they've mounted to the station's ventral surface. The manufacturing date suggests it predates their presence in our territory by at least a decade. 1 cannon, Dravos repeated this like it was the punchline to a joke, for a station in contested space. They have named it Daisy, Nexith added, which prompted another round of clicking laughter. Humans had this peculiar habit of naming their weapons like they were pets or family members. The Yventhri, who named their weapons things like Widowmaker and the Howling Death, found this both baffling and vaguely insulting. What self-respecting warrior called their armament Daisy? It was like showing up to a death match with a flower arrangement. The holographic display zoomed in on the station itself, a modest affair by galactic standards, ringed in a standard hexagonal pattern with greenhouse domes visible along the outer hull. Vegetation grew inside those domes, which was apparently what humans did when they weren't busy being disappointingly average. The station orbited the 4th moon of a gas giant the humans had labeled New Olympus, because of course they The moon itself was a barren rock with an atmosphere that would strip the flesh from most species in under 30 seconds. But the humans had decided it was a great place to study extremophile fungi, or whatever it was that justified parking a research station in the middle of nowhere. "What's their typical response time for distress signals?" asked one of the junior commanders, an ambitious specimen named Hravix, who'd only completed 4 hunts and was eager to make it 5. Given their position, approximately 16 hours for the nearest military vessel, Nexith replied. However, standard protocol would have them attempt negotiation first. Humans are remarkably attached to their diplomatic solutions, even when they're laughably outgunned. This was true. Humanity's first contact with the greater galactic community had involved them trying to establish trade negotiations while 3 different species were actively shooting at them. They'd eventually won that particular encounter through a combination of stubbornness and what appeared to be spite-based, tactical decisions. But the galaxy had collectively agreed that it was probably a fluke. The station's power signature suggests minimal crew activity. Nexith continued. Most of the energy is being routed to life support in their greenhouse operations. They're growing tomatoes while sitting in a strategic waypoint. Tomatoes, Dravos repeated slowly, as if testing the word for hidden weapons. This is their priority, and something called basil according to their supply manifests. The War Council was silent for a moment, trying to process the sheer audacity of a species that would establish an outpost in contested territory and dedicate resources to growing garnish. It was in a way almost impressive. The same way watching someone juggle chainsaws while blindfolded was impressive, right up until it became tragic. "The hunt will proceed as planned," Dravos announced, his decision final. "We deploy 3 assault cruisers and a carrier group. The younger warriors will lead the boarding action. This will serve as an excellent training exercise in breach tactics and close quarters elimination." Using a human research station as a training exercise was admittedly a bit like using a goldfish to teach wolf cubs how to hunt. But the Yventhri had always believed in starting small. Besides, it sent a message to the other species in the sector. This is what happens when you plant your flags in Yventhri territory, without asking permission first. The humans have broadcast standard research frequency transmissions, Nexith noted, pulling up communication log. Nothing encrypted. They've been cataloging fungal spores and sending enthusiastic reports about successful herb cultivation. Their last transmission included a recipe for something called pesto. They're not even trying to hide, Hravix observed, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. "Why would they?" Dravos spread his forearms wide. "They don't know we're coming. And even if they did, what would they do? Throw tomatoes at us?" More clicking laughter. The mental image of humans desperately hurling vegetables at armored Yventhri warriors was apparently the height of comedy. The mission parameters were set. The fleet would depart within 6 hours, make the jump to the new Olympus system, and arrive on the station's doorstep with overwhelming force. Standard intimidation protocols would be followed. Broadcast superiority. Demand surrender. Ignore whatever pleading response the humans offered, and then proceed with the assault. The whole operation was expected to take maybe 4 hours from arrival to complete subjugation, including time for the warriors to pose with their prey for the commemorative holographs. It was by every measure the Yventhri possessed going to be the easiest hunt of the season. As the War Council dispersed, Dravos remained behind, studying the holographic display of the human station. Something about it nagged at him, not enough to call off the hunt, but enough to register as the faintest whisper of instinct. The station's position was almost too perfect, too vulnerable. The humans were new to galactic politics, yes, but they'd survived their first contact wars. They'd established trade routes and defensive. They were currently negotiating mining rights with the Tolgothi Confederacy, and had just concluded a cultural exchange program with the Feminine Collective. And yet here was a research station, completely isolated, minimally defended, sitting in disputed territory, like a gift-wrapped present. Dravos dismissed the thought. Humans were known for their scattered approach to colonization. They went wherever curiosity took them, consequences be damned. It was one of their more endearing qualities, right up until it got them killed. He turned away from the holographic display, already mentally composing the report he'd file after the hunt. Human Research Station Designation NOS-7. Successful training exercise in asymmetric warfare. Had a nice ring to it. The flagship's engines hummed to life. The fleet assembled in formation, each ship bristling with weapons that could reduce the human station to its component atoms in under 60 seconds. Pilots ran through pre-flight checks. Warriors sharpened their natural weapons and blessed their combat armor in the names of ancient prey gods. The Yventhri were going hunting, and absolutely nothing was going to go wrong. The jump to the new Olympus system took 6 hours of compressed space-time that felt like being squeezed through a tube made of physics that hadn't quite made up its mind about existing yet. The Yventhri fleet emerged from hyperspace with the kind of precision that came from 3 centuries of military excellence. Their ships dropping into normal space in perfect formation, weapons hot, sensors sweeping, ready to deliver overwhelming force to a target that was probably still watering its herb garden. The gas giant dominated the viewport, a swirling mass of orange and crimson storms that could swallow a dozen planets and still have room for dessert. Its 4th moon hung in orbit like a gray pock-marked afterthought, and there, clinging to the moon's gravity well like a metallic barnacle, was the Human Research Station. Target acquired, Nexith announced from her position at the tactical console. Station is exactly where intelligence predicted. No deviation from expected position. Well, that was reassuring in the way that finding your prey exactly where you expected it to be was either a sign of good intelligence work or the Yventhri, being the apex predators they were, naturally assumed it was the former. Drevos leaned forward in his command throne, 4 of his eyes focused on the magnified image of the station. It looked even less impressive in person than it had in the hologram. The hexagonal structure seemed almost delicate, like someone had built a space station out of good intentions and optimism rather than proper military-grade paranoia. The greenhouse domes glowed with soft interior lighting, and he could actually see plant life through the transparent section. They were really growing tomatoes, in space, in contested territory. Humans were either the bravest species in the galaxy, or the dumbest, and the smart money was on the latter. Run a full sensor sweep, Drevos ordered. Give me everything. Power signatures, life signs, weapons status, communication activity, what they had for breakfast if possible. The sensor arrays went to work, painting the station with enough electromagnetic radiation to give a lesser species cancer. Data streamed across the holographic displays in cascading waves of information that the Yventhri tactical computers processed faster than most organic minds could follow. Power output is consistent with previous observations, the sensor officer reported, his mandibles clicking through the data. 70% allocated to life support and environmental systems, 20% to station keeping and gravity generation, 10% to that single plasma cannon and their sensor arrays. Life signs, 42 distinct biological signatures, all human, no abnormal readings, no signs of combat readiness. Elevated heart rates detected, but that's consistent with them realizing they have 4 Yventhri warships on their doorstep. Kravix, who was practically vibrating with anticipation in his harness, pulled up the station's external camera feeds. The Yventhri had long ago perfected the art of slicing into civilian communication systems, not because it was particularly difficult, but because most species treated cybersecurity like it was someone else's problem. The human station's networks were protected by encryption that a motivated child could crack, and within seconds they had visual access to the interior. Humans scurried through corridors, their faces displaying that peculiar range of emotions their species was known for. Panic, confusion, what looked like anger, and in one case, someone who appeared to be calmly watering a potted plant despite the impending doom. The researchers wore standard civilian environment suits, not a weapon visible among them, except for what appeared to be extremely aggressive clipboard wielding. They're not even armed, Kravix observed with something approaching disappointment. Why would they be? Nexith replied. They're botanists, not soldiers. I'm reading 0 military-grade equipment aboard that station, except for the plasma cannon, and that thing probably takes 10 minutes to charge, and another 5 to aim. Drevos studied the humans on the feeds, watching them move with the jerky efficiency of prey animals who just realized the predator was at the door. One of them, a male with graying hair and the kind of face that suggested he'd spent his life disappointed by the universe, appeared to be in charge. He was barking orders at the others, pointing at various stations, his mouth moving in what was presumably some kind of emergency Hail them, Dravos ordered. Standard intimidation protocol. Let's see if they beg prettily. The communication officer opened a channel, broadcasting on all frequencies the humans were known to monitor. The view screen flickered, and suddenly the gray-haired human was staring at them from what appeared to be the station's command center. Behind him, various displays showed plant growth cycles and atmospheric readings, because of course the command center of a research station doubled as botanical monitor. "This is High Commander Dravos of the Yventhri Empire," he announced, letting his voice carry the full weight of 3 centuries of martial dominance. "Your station has been designated for immediate seizure. You will surrender all personnel and materials to Yventhri authority. Resistance will be met with lethal force. You have 5 minutes to comply." The human stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, actually sighed, like this was a minor inconvenience, rather than a life-or-death situation. "Yeah, I was afraid of this," the human said, rubbing his eyes. "Look, Commander, we're just a research station. We don't have anything worth taking except some really excellent basil and a fungal culture that's mildly toxic to most carbon-based life forms. Can we maybe skip the whole intimidation thing and work something out?" Dravos felt his mandibles spread in what his species considered a smile, but most others interpreted as a prelude to being eaten. "Negotiations are not available. Surrender is your only option." "Right, sure, surrender." The human looked off camera at something, then back. "Quick question. When you say immediate seizure, are we talking like boarding action immediate? Or do we have time to shut down the hydroponics properly? Only we've got some experiments that really shouldn't be interrupted mid-cycle." Was this human actually trying to negotiate gardening time? "You have 5 minutes, Dravos repeated, his patience wearing thin. "Can we make it 10? I've got a graduate student in Section 7, who's going to have a breakdown if we lose 6 months of growth data." Nexith leaned toward Dravos, her voice low. The human is attempting to stall. Classic prey behavior, extend the timeline. Hope for rescue, buy time for escape plans that won't work. 3 minutes, Dravos announced, cutting the timeline just to watch the human squirm. But the human didn't squirm. He just nodded, like they'd agreed on a lunch meeting, rather than the timing of his own capture. 3 minutes. Got it. We'll have the docking protocols ready. Station NOS 7 out. The channel closed. The Yventhri War Council stared at the blank screen, trying to process what had just happened. The human had responded to their ultimatum, with the energy of someone dealing with a mildly annoying bureaucratic procedure, rather than an existential threat. That Kravix began, then trailed off, uncertain how to finish the sentence. "Pathetic," Nexith supplied. "They're not even going to fight. This isn't a hunt, it's a collection operation." Dravos felt a flicker of that same instinct from before, the one that whispered something wasn't quite right, but he crushed it beneath layers of experience and certainty. The sensors showed exactly what they expected. The humans were behaving exactly as predicted, with that mixture of false bravery and ultimate pragmatism that characterized their species. "Prepare boarding parties," he ordered. "All warriors to assault positions. We take the station intact. Try not to damage the greenhouses. Command wants samples of their agricultural techniques." Because apparently even the Yventhri High Command was curious about how humans managed to grow tomatoes in space. The fleet moved into position, surrounding the station like wolves circling a wounded deer. Assault craft launched from the carrier, filled with warriors eager to claim their first human hunt. Weapons locked onto the station's critical systems, ready to disable any last-minute heroic. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan, which should have been the first warning sign. The first boarding craft had just locked onto the station's docking port, when the universe decided to remind the Yventhri that confidence and competence were not, in fact, the same thing. It started small, a minor fluctuation in the station's power signature that the sensors barely registered. The tactical officer noticed it first, his mandibles clicking in confusion as he studied the readout. "Commander, the station's energy output just spiked by 300%. Dravos turned toward the sensor display, four eyes narrowing. "Elaborate. The power readings are..." The officer stopped, his entire carapace going rigid. "Sir, the station isn't a station," which was the kind of statement that really needed more context. But before Dravos could demand clarification, the human research station did something that research stations generally weren't supposed to do. It unfolded. The hexagonal greenhouse modules that had looked so peaceful and agricultural suddenly rotated outward on concealed hinges, revealing that they weren't greenhouses at all, or rather they were greenhouses, in the same way that a camouflaged predator was technically still visible if you looked hard enough. Beneath the transparent domes, nestled among what were indeed actual tomato plants, because humans apparently committed to their deceptions, were weapons batteries. Lots of them. Railguns emerged from concealed ports. Missile tubes cycled open with the smooth precision of systems that had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. Point defense clusters unfolded like mechanical flowers blooming toward the sun. Except instead of seeking sunlight, they were seeking Yventhri ships to perforate. Daisy, the plasma cannon, turned out to have several dozen friends, who'd been hiding in the station's superstructure, and they were all powering up with the kind of energy signature that suggested they were significantly more modern than intelligence had indicated. "Evasive maneuver," Dravos roared, but physics and momentum were not on the Yventhri side. The fleet had positioned itself in a perfect engagement envelope around the station, which meant they were now in a perfect target-rich environment for weapons that had been specifically positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. The station opened up. The first salvo caught the lead assault craft before it could even begin to maneuver, railgun rounds punching through its armor like it was decorative tissue paper. The craft disintegrated in a bloom of atmosphere and superheated metal, taking its entire complement of warriors with. The second and third salvos walked across the Yventhri formation with the precision of someone who'd done this before. Not the panicked spray and pray of a desperate defense, but the calculated targeting of a gunner who knew exactly where to aim, and exactly how much force to apply. Missiles corkscrewed through space, dancing around point defense fire that was suddenly struggling to track targets that moved like they were being piloted by something with far better reaction times than should have been possible. "Return next," it screamed, but the Yventhri ships were already doing that, pumping enough ordnance at the station to level a small city. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds filled the space between the fleet and their target, creating a light show that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so catastrophically deadly. The station's defensive screens lit up, absorbing the incoming fire with the kind of efficiency that suggested they were rated for significantly more punishment than a research station had any business possessing. And behind those screens, the weapons batteries kept firing with methodical accuracy. How is a research station doing this? Pravix demanded from his station, his claws scrambling across the tactical display as another assault craft vanished from the sensor. Because it wasn't a research station. It had never been a research station. The truth crystallized in Dravos's mind with the bitter clarity of a predator, realizing it had walked into a trap set by something higher up the food chain. The isolation, the minimal defenses, the outdated cannon, the greenhouse domes full of actual plants, because what better way to sell the deception than to commit to growing actual tomatoes, while your weapons platforms waited in standby mode beneath them. The humans hadn't stumbled into Yventhri territory by accident. They hadn't established an under-defended research station out of naivety or ignorance. They'd dangled bait, and the Yventhri had taken it with both hands and all four arms. "They knew we were coming," Dravos said quietly, the words tasting like ash. "They wanted us to..." The communication channel crackled open without being hailed, and the gray-haired human appeared on the view screen again. He no longer looked disappointed or tired. He looked satisfied, like a fisherman who'd just felt a big one take the hook. "Commander Dravos," the human said, his voice carrying none of the nervous deference from before, "allow me to properly introduce myself. I'm Admiral Yannick Wu, United Earth Naval Intelligence, and you've just become a teaching moment." Behind the Admiral, the station's command center had transformed. The botanical readouts had been replaced by tactical displays showing the Yventhri fleet in perfect detail, including projected escape vectors, structural weak points, and what appeared to be psychological profiles of every commander in the War Council. "We've been studying your species for 2 years," Wu continued conversationally, like he was discussing the weather rather than the systematic destruction of a military fleet. "Your hunting patterns, your tactical preference, your cultural obsession with proving dominance through overwhelming force against weaker targets. Very predictable, once you understand the underlying psychology." Another Yventhri cruiser took critical damage, its port side buckling under concentrated fire. The crew began emergency evacuation procedures, life pods launching into space only to be carefully ignored by the station's weapons. The humans were targeting ships, not helpless survivors, which somehow made it worse, like they were trying to prove a point about proportional response, while dismantling a military fleet. "The tomatoes were real, by the way," Wu added. "So was the basil. Some of the botanists actually are conducting research between shifts at the weapons station. Humans are excellent multitaskers." Dravos felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 decades of military service. Genuine fear, not the adrenaline rush of facing worthy prey, but the cold comprehension that he was no longer the predator in this scenario. "You used yourselves as bait," Nexith breathed, her voice carrying a mixture of horror and unwilling respect. "We used a fortified military platform disguised as a research station as bait," Wu corrected. "The personnel aboard volunteered. Bit of a difference, though I can see how you'd miss that distinction given your approach to sentient life." The station's weapons fire intensified, and Dravos realized with mounting dread that they'd been holding back. The initial salvos had been measured, controlled, designed to cripple rather than destroy, to contain rather than obliterate. The humans had been giving the Yventhri a chance to surrender. That chance was apparently expiring. "All ships, full retreat," Dravos ordered, abandoning any pretense of tactical dignity. "Jump to hyperspace on my mark." "About that," Wu interrupted. "You might notice your hyperspace drives aren't responding properly. Bit of an electromagnetic issue we've created in the local space. Nothing permanent, should clear up in about 6 hours. Unfortunately for you, we've already transmitted your position to several very interested parties, who've been looking for an opportunity to discuss your hunting practices. The feminine collective is particularly eager to have words with you." The sensor officer's mandibles went slack. "He's right, sir. Jump drives are offline. We're locked in normal space." They were trapped. The hunters had become the hunted, penned in by invisible walls of disrupted physics, while the prey they'd stalked revealed fangs they'd never known exist. "So here's how this works," Wu said, leaning back in his chair with the casual authority of someone holding all the cards. "You're going to power down your weapons, surrender your vessels, and submit to detainment pending investigation of your activities in contested space. Your crews will be treated according to standard conventions for prisoners of war, which means considerably better than you were planning to treat my people, I might add. And if we refuse," Dravos managed, though they both knew the answer. Wu's expression didn't change. "Then we stop aiming for your engines, and start aiming for everything else. Your choice, Commander. You have 3 minutes to decide." The irony of the timeline wasn't lost on anyone. The Yventhri flagship's bridge had gone from the confident buzz of predators closing in for the kill to the suffocating silence of prey. Realizing the exits were locked, Dravos stood at the center of it all, his forearms hanging at his sides, staring at the tactical display that showed his fleet in various states of structural failure, surrounded by a station that had somehow become the most dangerous thing in the star system. 2 of his cruisers were venting atmosphere. 3 assault craft were gone entirely. Not destroyed, but disabled, their crews trapped inside dead hulls, waiting for either rescue or death. The carrier had taken damage to its launch bays, fires burning in the oxygen-rich environment while automated systems struggled to contain the blaze. And through it all, the human station sat there, like a mechanical spider in the center of its web, weapons tracking every Yventhri vessel, with the patient attention of something that knew it had already won. "Commander," Nexith said quietly, her voice stripped of its earlier confidence. "We need to make a decision." Dravos wanted to rage. He wanted to order a full assault, to throw everything they had at that station, and damn the consequences, to prove that the Yventhri Empire didn't surrender to herbivorous apes who grew vegetables in space. But 3 centuries of military tradition also included a rather extensive survival instinct, and that instinct was currently screaming at him to swallow his pride before it choked him to death. "How many crew have we lost?" he asked instead. 147 confirmed dead, the casualty officer reported. "Another 200 wounded. If we continue engagement, projections suggest complete fleet destruction within 18 minutes. 18 minutes. The Yventhri had anticipated this operation taking 4 hours from start to finish, including time for commemorative holographs. Instead, they were looking at total annihilation in less time than it took to properly sharpen one's mandible. On the view screen, Admiral Wu waited with the infinite patience of someone who knew time was on his side. Behind him, the station's weapons batteries maintained their steady tracking. Dozens of barrels pointed at Yventhri ships, like an executioner waiting for the order to drop the blade. "Tell me something," Drevos said, his pride making one last desperate stand. "The intelligence reports, the station's specifications, the minimal defenses, all of it was falsified." Wu tilted his head, considering the question. "Not falsified, exactly. Misdirected. Everything we broadcast was technically true. We are conducting botanical research. We did have 42 personnel aboard, and we do have a plasma cannon named Daisy. We just didn't mention the other 93 personnel rotating through in shifts, or the additional 47 weapons platforms, or the fact that this research station is actually a prototype for humanity's new forward operating base design." "You lied, Brevix." "We omitted," Wu corrected with the kind of semantic precision that made the distinction somehow worse. "There's a difference. You assumed we were helpless because we appeared helpless. We built our entire strategy around your species' tendency to underestimate prey that doesn't bare its teeth immediately." The communication officer leaned toward Drevos. "Sir, I'm picking up additional contacts. 3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge. Transponders identify them as feminine collective diplomatic vessels. Of course, the feminine collective, whose hunting preserves the Yventhri had been poaching from for the last decade. The same collective, who'd been trying to catch the Yventhri red-handed for years, but could never quite prove which Imperial fleets were responsible for the raids. And now here was a Yventhri war fleet, trapped in normal space, caught in the act of attempting to seize a civilian station in contested territory. Wu smiled. "It wasn't a pleasant expression. I may have sent them an invitation when your fleet jumped into the system. Hope you don't mind. They've been very interested in having a chat with whoever's been decimating their wildlife population." The diplomatic vessels were accelerating toward their position, and while they were ostensibly unarmed, the collective took their pacifist reputation seriously. They carried legal authority that even the Yventhri Empire couldn't simply ignore, not without triggering a diplomatic incident that would make the current military disaster look like a minor setback. Drevos felt the trap closing from all sides. The humans hadn't just beaten them tactically, they'd beaten them strategically, politically, and psychologically. Every assumption the Yventhri had made about human weakness had been deliberately cultivated, fed and nurtured, until the moment came to pull the rug out and watch an entire war fleet stumble into the abyss. 1 minute, Commander, Wu said, glancing at a chronometer off-screen. "Though I should mention, we've also been recording this entire engagement. Full tactical data, communication logs, weapons discharge patterns. Makes for very interesting evidence in what I imagine will be several different war crimes tribunals." The Yventhri didn't even have a word for that concept in their language. Hunting was hunting. Prey was prey. The idea that there were rules about how you killed things seemed fundamentally absurd to a species that had built its entire civilization around the principle of might makes right. But the galaxy had rules, and humanity apparently knew them all. "How long have you been planning this?" Drevos asked, genuine curiosity overriding his wounded pride. Wu leaned forward, his expression shifting to something almost educational. "Since the 3rd week we entered galactic space and started analyzing the political landscape. We're new here, Commander. We're small, we're technologically behind, and we're surrounded by species that have been playing these games for millennia. So we did what humans do when we're outmatched. We studied, we adapted, and we set traps. For us specifically, for anyone dumb enough to think human equaled easy target." Wu gestured at the tactical display. "Your species just happened to take the bait first. Could have been the Vremnath Dominion. Could have been the Tolgathi Confederacy. Could have been any of a dozen predator species that think new arrivals in the galactic community are free resources. You just had the distinction of being the most predictable. The word stung worse than any weapon discharge. Predictable. The Yventhri, apex hunters of the Outer Rim, masters of the kill, reduced to predictable prey animals, following their base instincts into a trap any competent predator should have seen coming. 30 seconds, Wu announced. Nexith looked at Drevos, her eyes carrying a question that didn't need to be spoken aloud. They could refuse. They could go down fighting, take as many humans with them as possible, die with honor according to Yventhri tradition. It would be a glorious end to a hunt gone wrong, the kind of story that would be told in military academies for generations. It would also be completely pointless. All ships, Drevos said, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would haunt him for whatever remained of his career. Power down weapons. Prepare for surrender protocols. The words felt like poison in his throat, but he said them anyway. Survival trumped honor. Living to fight another day, beat dying for pride. These were lessons the Yventhri taught their young hunters, though they'd never expected to be on the receiving end of them. The fleet's weapons went dark. One by one the Yventhri ships signaled compliance, their crews watching their sensor displays as the human station maintained target lock for another 30 seconds, just to make the point that they could have ended this at any moment, before standing down to a defensive posture. Good choice, Wu said, and he actually sounded relieved, which was somehow worse than if he'd gloated. Boarding teams will transfer to your vessels within the hour. You and your crews will be confined to quarters pending arrival of collective adjudicator. Medical teams are already en route to assist with your wounded. Medical teams. They'd lost a fight, surrendered their entire fleet, and the humans were sending doctors. For what it's worth, Wu added, his tone shifting to something almost sympathetic. You're not the first predator species to make this mistake. You probably won't be the last. Humans look soft because we don't have natural weapons, because we negotiate before we fight, because we grow tomatoes in our military installations. But that's the thing about humans, Commander. We've been prey animals for most of our evolutionary history. We spent millions of years getting hunted by things bigger, faster, and stronger than us. Wu stood up from his chair, and for the first time Drevos noticed the old scars on the Admiral's hands. The way he moved with the careful economy of someone who'd been in combat before. We learned to think our way out of being eaten, Wu continued. Learned to set traps, to use tools, to turn our weaknesses into advantages. And now we're in space, surrounded by new predators. And you know what? The same principles apply. You thought you were hunting, but from the moment you marked this station as a target, you were already caught. The communication channel closed, leaving the Yventhri bridge in silence once again. Drevos looked at his officers, saw his own defeat reflected in their postures, and felt something shift in his understanding of the galaxy. The Yventhri were apex predators in the Outer Rim. They'd been hunting for 3 centuries, taking what they wanted, proving their dominance through force and skill. But humans had been prey for millions of years before they became predators. And prey animals, when they finally learned to fight back, had a very different understanding of what it meant to hunt. The feminine collective diplomatic vessels were closing in. Human boarding teams were preparing to transfer. The Yventhri fleet sat dead in space, disabled not through overwhelming firepower, but through overwhelming preparation, outthought and outmaneuvered by a species they dismissed as insignificant. Somewhere in the galaxy, the next predator species was probably looking at humanity's scattered colonies and minimal military presence, seeing easy prey, making plans for their own hunt. They'd study the intelligence reports, note the weak defenses, calculate their odds of success, and they'd never see the trap until it closed around them. Because that was the thing about apex predators. They always assumed they were at the top of the food chain. It took prey animals to remember that food chains were circular, that what went up inevitably came down, and that the hunted sometimes learned to hunt back. The Yventhri had learned that lesson today. They wouldn't be the last. Admiral Wu returned to his chair in the station's command center, watching the subdued Yventhri fleet on his displays. Around him his crew was already beginning post-battle assessments. Damage reports, casualty counts. 3 personnel injured, none critically. Structural integrity holding at 94%. Weapons systems optimal. The tomatoes in Section 7 were completely fine. Think they'll actually change their behavior.
his executive officer asked, pulling up files on the incoming collective adjudicator. Wu considered the question, watching the Yventhri flagship drift powerless in space. Some will, some won't. But word will spread. And the next time a predator species looks at a human outpost and thinks easy prey, maybe, just maybe, they'll remember what happened here and wonder what else we're not telling them. And if they do, Wu smiled, glancing at the greenhouse monitors, where actual botanists were actually checking on actual experiments, because humans really were that committed to multitasking. Then we've got 17 more of these stations deploying across contested space in the next 6 months. Eventually the slow learners will figure it out. He pulled up the after-action report template and began typing. Mission status complete. Target acquired. Lesson delivered. Also, the Basil is doing great.